Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to hear more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. And once again, thank you to everyone who has subscribed, and please continue to watch the ads on my videos to support my channel for free. Thank you. So today's video is going to be one of those long rants kind of videos. I'm going to try to organize it as best as I can. I have had a lot of requests in the previous, well, especially since my last blog post, I've had a lot of requests of people saying, can you talk about manifestation? Because you mentioned that you talk about manifestation, you mentioned that you manifested some things in your life, and can you talk about procedures? First of all, I didn't even realize that manifestation is like a thing that is being talked about. Like, since then I've done some research, and there are entire like channels. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've come across some of these The Secret inspired channels that talk about attracting what you want, but I didn't realize that manifesting has now become some kind of a sport. Maybe not exactly a sport, but you know what I mean. It's become an entire, I don't know, an entire activity in itself. And it got me thinking, not just about the idea of manifestation, but it got me thinking about astrology in general and about the traps of astrology and some of the pitfalls that you can come across while studying astrology or any kind of, let's say esoteric practice, whether it's Wicca, whether it's tarot, whether it's whatever it is that you use to make sense of the world around you through uncommon knowledge, let's say. And one of the main pitfalls is fatalism, and I'm not ashamed to say that I have fallen into this trap. So just as an introduction, I'm going to talk about, first of all, my personal experiences, because again, and these personal experiences are to illustrate both the pitfalls and the positive sides of, quote, manifesting and astrology. They're also tied to astrology. And after I, talk about some of my personal experiences, I'm also going to talk about my general observations with respect to astrology, the trappings of fatalism and fatalistic thinking, and also about, quote, manifesting and how to use astrology in a way that will actually better your life instead of actually overcomplicating it. Okay? So I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can, but it's still probably going to be a really long rant, okay? I'm not going to start with, my entire life story or whatever, but I will start with, let's say, roughly around the last decade, which has been also the most eventful in my life. Okay, so I think I also mentioned this in one of my previous videos that I don't want to say I've struggled. I guess I have. I don't want to use these terms, but I guess there's no other way to put it. I have struggled with mental or emotional health issues for the past decade or the past 15 years or so. It got to the point where, I have been depressed on and off, and I still sometimes struggle with depression right now, in today's, in the 21st, not just 21st, but 2021. But it isn't nearly as bad as it used to be, like, during my teenage years. And just for the record, again, I'm in my early 30s right now. And getting to the point, okay, how I really discovered my power. I kind of briefly talked about this in the Rahu Mahadasha video. And when I say my power, I don't mean like I discovered supernatural abilities, but I mean how I took my power back. I was in a state of really complete powerlessness before. Like when I was in my late teens, my early 20s, I had the lowest of the lowest self-esteem. And a lot of it, even though I didn't recognize it at that time, well, I kind of slowly started realizing what was happening when I was around 20 to 21. But up until that point, I was in denial about a lot of things that had happened throughout my life, especially in my childhood, that were pretty much abusive. And I was really depressed. I didn't understand why I was depressed until I reached, I think, the age of 20 to 21, when I remember I started Googling articles on depression. But just to give you the general feeling of how depressed I was, like, there were times in high school where I would spend an entire day in bed. And I mean, I was so tired that I didn't want anything out of life. I remember the worst time of my life when I was about 17, 18, and I would like literally sleep 18 hours straight. I didn't leave my room, like, sometimes. I remember my mother used to ask me if I'm doing drugs. And now I kind of laugh about it because she really didn't have the right approach to the whole thing, but I won't blame her because whatever, it's a totally different topic of discussion. But she was raised in a generation where mental health and psychology is is thrown under the bucket of mumbo jumbo, and you just don't take it seriously, etc., etc. And I was really, really, really depressed. And I think that's really like the definition of depression, is that you get to that point where you feel completely beyond miserable. Like, you feel like I remember I used to ask myself these questions, like, if I could have anything out of life, what would it be? And coming up with nothing. Like, all I could think about was that I wanted to sleep for the rest of eternity. And like, that's how tired I was. There were days when, I was so tired, like, just everyday activities, everything was difficult. Getting dressed, going to school, everything seemed pointless, everything was meaningless. And not just that, but I was in constant emotional pain, okay? I was like, without realizing what the source was, I was, I had this constant feeling of like heaviness around my chest, like something like a brick was pulling at my inner, pulling at my ribs from the inside, like my rib cage was about to cave in any second. I used to self-harm, even though I didn't know that it was self-harming. I used to pick my skin compulsively, which I still sometimes do, but again, not to the extent that I used to do when I was a teenager. Like, I was again so in denial about it that I didn't even realize it was self-harm until I came across some mental health site again when I was in my 20s, and that described this thing called dermatillomania as actually a form of self-harm. And I didn't, I was in denial about it. I was doing it since I was 13, to the point where, like, and here's the thing, some people might think, well, everybody picks their skin every once in a while, but I got to the point where I would, like, rip patches of skin off my shoulders to the point where there was like blood running down my arms and my back. And I remember one time I had to go to the doctor and feeling so embarrassed when I could see like how horrified he looked like at my skin and my shoulders. I think he probably just assumed that I had a really bad case of acne. He didn't ask any questions because like that's, it's a long story, but I was really, really depressed, and I had like the lowest self-esteem, like, and the lowest confidence, and I was failing exams. I got into university after high school, and by the way, I don't even remember how I graduated high school. I remember I was so didn't care. I didn't care about the future. I thought that I would be dead by the time I was 25. So I thought, what is the point of like trying to do anything? And I just thought, whatever, I'm just gonna go to some college degree that I could sort of manage or cruise through, but I didn't consider what I actually wanted to do with my life, I think. And, so when I graduated high school, just barely, because I remember before my final exams at high school, I didn't even bother to learn. Like, I swear to God, I don't even know how I graduated, because, I mean, I knew mathematics and English, and those were the two subjects that I was not stressed about. Physics also, I got an average grade. But in literature, whatever, grammar, I remember I nearly flunked the exam, and that was supposedly the easiest part of the exam, but I flunked it because I didn't study at all. I literally didn't care, okay? And I just thought, whatever, I'll just get the minimum passing grade. And I did. For literature, I got the minimum passing grade, but luckily I had higher grades in math than the rest of them, so overall I had an average grade. And I went to university for a degree related to economics because everybody was saying, I figured, first of all, I was thinking, really, I didn't want to go to university, but I didn't feel confident at that time and to be able to tell my parents, look, I'm not going to go to university. I don't care what you think. I'm just going to get a job. I was so insecure that I didn't think I could hold down a job. And I also just had massive mood swings around that time. So, like, literally from morning to evening, I would go from feeling relatively stable to feeling suicidal by the evening. And I would go through, and throughout university, and this was like my late teens, early 20s, I struggled a lot. I was failing a lot of exams. I didn't feel motivated at all. I could barely focus in class, and everybody was telling me, like, not everybody, but like even in high school and in our city, this university didn't have a great reputation. It was a university where basically you could get in with low grades as long as you paid the tuition. And my parents paid the tuition. It was a 3-year college program, and it took me 4 years to graduate eventually. Not the sort of things that are the most flattering to talk about, but trust me, the whole story will pick up as it goes along, and it's important to understand the whole issue of manifesting and whatever. So finally I graduated, and by the time I finally graduated, so again, it was a 3-year program. I graduated after 4 years, barely, whatever. And I finally graduated, and then I couldn't get a job. And I graduated. Part of that was also because I didn't study that much. It is true, but mostly I think it was because I graduated around the time when the economic crisis from 2008 finally hit this part of the world, and it was like the aftermath of 2008, the crash of 2008. And jobs were just super scarce. And I remember I had colleagues in college who had gotten jobs like, something like stacking shelves at a supermarket, and those were the lucky ones. Like, they were lucky to have those jobs, and they were grateful to have those jobs, because by the time that I graduated, it was impossible to get any kind of a job, even without any education. I remember I applied to hundreds of jobs, and I got like maybe for, I think, a handful of them, I was called for an interview. Only one of them was actually based in economics, and I didn't pass it because it was something on financial markets, and I didn't have the level of knowledge that they needed. I remember that, and maybe if I had gotten that job, I wouldn't have made the choices I made afterwards. But whatever, it's all in the past now. Eventually... So eventually, after I graduated, also around the same time, actually, while I was applying for jobs, I actually filed for unemployment benefit, which, by the way, unemployment benefit in around these parts, again, it's not something that you can live off of. It's basically enough to buy maybe tea and bread for a month. So basically, I was still living at home, but my parents were mostly not at home because they were retired and lived in a different house, but technically I was living at home, in the same place that I had grown up in, and And I was lucky because I could live at home and I didn't have to support myself, because my parents paid the bills and all that. But of course, as you would imagine, I was not happy about the situation. It just added to my depression ultimately. But I had started to read around this time on mental health topics. I started to understand depression. I started to understand how the main root of depression is actually repressed anger. And that was like the main revolutionary trigger that led to basically slowly recovering and getting to a point where I felt like where I was still in control of my life and taking actions to better my circumstances. And what happened was, so finally, after about a year, after almost, I think about 8 to 10 months after I had graduated university, I got my first job. I got my first job, which was a minimum wage job, selling stuff in a supermarket, and it was the worst job. I was fired after 3 weeks because I couldn't make the sales. And at the point, in retrospect, I made a mistake to just accept that job because I was so desperate. I just wanted any experience, because up until that point I was in my early 20s and I had never really had a real job, except, I think I had something like a small internship, unpaid internship, and something like a course. So I had like semi-professional experience, but no real job. So I was so desperate to get a job that I just got the first thing. I signed the contract without even reading it properly. And the contract basically said that if you didn't sell a number of items per shift, they had the right to terminate the contract. And it was such a stupid job. And honestly, I empathize with everyone who ever has to work in sales. I don't have the stomach for it, clearly. I don't think I would ever take that kind of a job ever again. I had to be on my feet 12 hours, so I had to work like 12 hours a day every other day. And, I had to be on my feet. And if you got that job, I mean, just being on your feet for so long was so painful. And you had to keep offering products to everyone who was walking in. It was in a supermarket. We had a little stand. I had never even met the bosses and whatever. And the boss was absolutely toxic. I remember one time I took a bathroom break. And just for the record, the bathroom was like a few hundred meters away from where we were, and I took like a 10-minute break, and immediately when I got back to the stand, the boss called me and said, like, why did you spend so long at the bathroom? Like, I mean, just to give you an example, and it got to the point where the boss was telling me that I wasn't trying, that I wasn't working, and I was literally doing the best that I could, because it's a job where you have to offer products and like, hey, do you want to test this product? Do you want to test this product? You can't just force people to buy stuff. That's what sales is about. But if you don't make the mark, they don't care. And honestly, I thought it was a horrible thing, and to some extent, I was happy that I was fired after, I think, less than a month of working there. A month after that, I got another, quote, offer of a real job, and it was not much better. It was working in a supermarket, making sandwiches and, let me think, sandwiches and some bakery stuff and salads. And the job, again, was just over minimum wage. Like, if I had been on my own, having to survive on that salary, I couldn't have survived. Except if I had, like, maybe 2 roommates and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. Then maybe I would have survived. And I was, as you can imagine, really depressed. I was a college graduate, and I got a job making sandwiches. But at the same time, I was kind of, like, excited because this was like my first real job, and I know it probably sounds sad to some people, but I was like, again, I was in my early 20s at this point, and this was again within 1 year after graduating my first college degree. And the job in itself, the reason I even survived at that job was because, again, it was a job where you had to be on your feet all day. We were understaffed because it was a crappy job where a lot of people, they had something like 3 or 4 girls come before me and they quit their jobs because they couldn't stand it. It was physically exhausting. You didn't always have the weekend off. You had 2 days out of 7, but it wasn't always the weekend. And because we were understaffed, we always had to work overtime. And the overtimes were only paid after about 3 months after I got that job. And I had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, take a bus at 10 minutes after 5, and then go there. I had to be there at 10 minutes before 6 to change into my work clothes, because as you know, when you work with food, you can't wear your streetwear. And I had to be on my feet. Since I'm used to going to bed late, I've been going to bed late my entire life, I could never get more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night. And I was constantly tired. And the reason I survived, that's what I wanted to say, was the fact that, was because I had an even crappier job beforehand. So when I got this job where I only had to be on my feet like 8 to 10 hours a day versus 12 hours, 12 hours that I had at the previous job, it was much easier for me, whereas other people who had taken this job, they couldn't last just being on their feet for so long. They would start to get, sore, and they would quit like within a week or 2 weeks. Whatever. This was like my real first job, and it was like military training. I had to be up at 4:30. I had to have the uniform clean. It was a job. It was physically really tiring, where you had to go. There were different sections of the cooking section of a supermarket, so that's where we worked. And you had to go in cooler places that were basically like big refrigerator rooms, and you had to sit there for sometimes, half an hour to prepare different things. And then you would go into heated areas where it was the bakery room to do something like pizzas or whatever. So I would constantly move in and out, hot and cold temperatures, which caused chronic back pain. On top of that, I had to lift heavy I'm not going to use I was about to use a bad word. I had to lift heavy stuff. I would lift like crates of 20 kilograms of mozzarella to do the pizzas and stuff. 20 kilograms, that's about like 40 to 50 pounds. I would have to lift them over my head. Sometimes I would have to lift sacks of flour or whatever, or what do you call them? Corn, milled corn or whatever, corn flour. And those were like up to 50 kilograms. Like I'm talking about 100 pounds, 120 pounds. And my back was constantly in pain the whole time when I worked here. I worked here for about, I think, 6 months in total. Right. This is the part where it gets a little bit interesting. On the first day, I got home on the first day of this job. And I got home, and my parents were waiting for my mother's biopsy results. She had gone through, testing. They suspected her of cancer. And guess what? I come home from the first day of work, and she tells me that it's cancer. And at first, I was just like, I was in complete disbelief. My mother was 60. And cancer did run in the family. I had a sister who passed away of cancer, although she passed away many years before I was born. I knew that it was in the family. I had a lot of members of my family die of cancer. And when I heard that she was diagnosed, I just couldn't believe it. Like, I was in shock. And she said that, the doctor wouldn't tell her how advanced it was. They knew that it was the uterus. And the doctor would just told her that it was a very aggressive form and it had to be operated immediately. So she got her diagnosis, I remember, on a Friday, and she went into surgery, I think the next Monday or the next Tuesday. She was into surgery for like 4 hours. They took out everything, her entire reproductive system. It was really a bad, traumatic thing. I mean, for me, it just made me weigh everything. But at the same time, this is already the first part where I'm going to get into, I think, a little bit of manifestation, quote unquote. my attitude was just like, I refuse to accept the possibility that she may pass away. Like, I just, from the moment she got diagnosed, I am not a very religious person. I come from a Christian background. I do pray, but I pray more out of convention, like, if that makes sense. Like, I don't actually, I haven't even fully read the New Testament from one end to another, but I pray, the only prayer that I have used my entire life, 1 and 2, there's another one, but the main one is just Our Father. That's it. That's all the praying that I did. And once my mother got sick, I prayed every night. I prayed, like, please, if you do this, I promise, I'll be a better person. Please, like, save my mother, help her, heal from this. And I would try to do things like, and then of course you have to follow it up with actions. My mother, up until that point, she was addicted to, I wouldn't say, she wasn't addicted to junk food, but she was drinking a lot of soda. She would literally drink soda instead of water. And one of the first things she did was she cut sugar, she started eating healthier, she did go to chemotherapy, which was really traumatic, but I think the reason I wanted to mention this is because that was a trigger point for me. I was, in my early 20s, I felt like my life was going nowhere, and although she didn't pester me like on a daily basis, like, hey, do something with your life, what are you doing? I felt like she was kind of disappointed, like, I don't know, I just felt like she was disappointed. And I think 2 things happened once she got the diagnosis. Was that, number one, I realized that it was also that motivation of, like, I wanted to do something with myself. Like, I wanted to make her feel proud. Like, I wanted to make her feel like, look, I'm doing something with myself, number one. And number 2 was, I think it was also simultaneously the realization that, my parents are not going to live forever, and if I don't do something more meaningful, I'm not going to be able to support myself financially. And that was another thing. So in between, right. So another thing that I should have mentioned is, like, during this year when in between graduation from my first college degree and my first job, I had also gone through 2 courses that were subsidized by the state for people who were having trouble getting jobs, quote unquote. None of these courses actually helped me get a job. And again, a lot of this, I think, was because of the situation at the time. Really, jobs were very, very scarce. And around the time, during this whole year, and even, before my mother got sick, I would occasionally talk to one of my former classmates from grade school and high school, and the only ones that had high-paying jobs, jobs that allowed them to support themselves financially, and the ones who had managed to get a job as soon as they graduated were the ones who graduated engineering, and meaning the local Polytechnic Institute, which I knew was a pretty prestigious university, and I knew that there were a lot of companies recruiting from this university. And to be fair, this was the university actually that my parents had pestered me to go to, and basically the reason I said no was the reason I said no the first time, right after I graduated high school, was first of all because I was not confident enough that I would be able to go through it. Second of all, and equally important, I was just too depressed. I felt this was a very challenging university. I didn't have the mental energy to go through with it. I knew that it was really challenging. It was, a lot of projects, a lot of work, and I just felt like I wouldn't be able to survive this kind of university at the time. And it was also, last but not least, because I was not convinced that this was my path. I almost went to another degree, a degree in economics, to basically as a last measure of expressing my willpower. Like, I felt, you don't listen to me, you people don't listen to me, you don't care about my happiness, I'm just gonna go to this university that that you don't want me to go to, just to prove that I am a person and I have my own willpower. And that was the end of discussion. And afterwards, what happened was, so this was, I still remember, my mother was diagnosed, I think, in mid-May of that year. And it just, having these conversations with former classmates, and I realized that these classmates were not smarter than I was. Like, when I was in grade school, these were kids, in high school, these were kids who were not smarter than I was in mathematics. And I mean, to be fair, I was never particularly passionate about engineering, as in electronics and taking things apart and all that stuff. But I knew that I was very logical. I knew that I was always among the top in my class in mathematics. I was like that kid who solved the most complicated geometry problems. And, I was good in calculus in high school and all that. So I figured, hey, I mean, if these dimwits can get a degree in engineering, I can get a degree in engineering. And around that time, I kind of weighed my options, and I considered, okay, I could maybe go for a second college degree. And I was actually considering for a while going for something like biology or medical school. But I knew that, especially at that time, because this was roughly 10 years ago, the opportunities for these fields to get a decent job, a job that would allow you to support yourself financially, were pretty slim. Okay? I knew that if I went for a degree in engineering, I would basically almost certainly get a job that would allow me to support myself. Okay? And that was the main thing that I wanted. The main thing. Okay? And I also, around this time, I had relatives who had offered to recommend me for jobs in Western Europe, but it would have been jobs something like being a maid or in a hotel or like being a waitress, and my pride kind of like kicked in, and I was like, absolutely not. I am not gonna do some kind of like hotel maintenance, because again, I had this ego of like, I knew that I was intelligent. I mean, throughout school, I was always kind of like among the smartest kids in my class. I was used to being respected for it. I was pretty good in a lot of subjects. I wasn't exceptional, but I was pretty good. I was always among the top in my class in creative writing, in, foreign languages. English is not my native tongue. In biology, I had artworks exhibited at school exhibitions. I mean, paintings and whatnot. I was in the school choir, etc., etc. I was in competitions in English, creative writing, etc. And I was also always among the top in my class in mathematics. And I knew that I could go through the Polytechnic. Like, and it's weird. It's like I suddenly had this jolt of like confidence of like, I can do this. But I think it wasn't until that trigger point where my mother got sick that I had enough motivation to actually go through with it. And around that time, so this was right mid-May, going back to the story, mid-May, and I knew the admission exam for the Polytechnic Institute was, I think, on the 1st of July. I knew that I had something like 6 weeks until the entry exam. And I swallowed my pride, and I went over to my father. And because my father and I, we didn't have good relations, and he was extremely judgmental and completely unempathetic and not reasonable when it came to the whole college thing. And in fact, it was mostly to piss him off that I didn't go to the Polytechnic in the first place, because he's the typical like parent that, pushes his frustrated ambitions onto his children. So I refused to do that, just out of principle. And I had to swallow my pride, and I was like, look, can you help me? I looked at, can you help me study for the entry exam at this university, because I'm considering doing a second degree. Because once again, to reiterate, I kind of weighed all my options, and I figured that going for another degree in engineering would be the best way for me to get a job that would pay enough for me to support myself. Okay, I knew that it was 4 years. I knew that it would be a long time, but I knew that if I had a degree from this university, it would be a huge stamp of approval. It would be a totally different thing than just doing a 3-month course or a 6-month course in programming or something. and it would help me get a job. Okay, so I was like, can you help me, study for the entry exam? There was an entry exam in calculus. At this time, I was out of high school for five years. So 5 years, I hadn't done any mathematics. Of course, why would I mean almost any? There was a course in economics, but it was really just nothing compared to the level that the Polytechnic required. Anyway, so basically throughout that 5 to 6 weeks period up, following to the admission exam, I still had my full-time job. I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning. I was taking the bus at 5:10. Going to work from 6 till about 2 to 3 p.m., sometimes up to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Then I would get home, I would sleep for 2-3 hours, and then I would do mathematics. I would do calculus up until usually 11 or 12 p.m. midnight. Sometimes I would go swimming after work, and then I would do mathematics. And this was like for 5 weeks before the admission exam. And I managed to get in, okay? I managed to get an 80% score out of 100. And to be fair, I don't think I would have made it, definitely not in as short of a time. I think I probably, actually, to be honest, I probably would have made it, but I wouldn't have gotten as high of a score if my father wouldn't have helped me with some of the training, because, yeah, whatever. He has high-level knowledge about this stuff. And I managed to get into the Polytechnic Institute, and the only reason I didn't get 100% score at that exam was because I had made 2 very silly inattention, mistakes. Like, I wasn't attentive with certain details, and I screwed up the final result for 2 exercises, and it was basically a grill exam. You had to circle the correct answers, and they didn't check the solution process. They didn't care if you had the right reasoning. You also were not allowed to use a calculator, so you had to do all the computing by hand. And they didn't care if you had the right reasoning if the final result was not the one that it should have been. They simply checked, the grill results, and that was it. That was the exam in itself. And it was pretty... overall, it was not extremely difficult, but, it took some freshening up, considering the fact that I hadn't studied mathematics in over 5 years. And right around this time, this conversation was also like my father at the time said something like, "I'm not paying for another university degree," and I said, "That's not the point. I'm not gonna go to the university if I don't make it on the government subsidized slots," which basically every year for these state universities, which in my country the state universities are more respected than the private ones. And which I think is true for probably the entire former communist country system. Basically he was like, "I'm not going to pay for another university." And I said, yeah, if I get through the entry exam, if I'm selected for the slots that are tuition free, then I will go to university. If I don't, then I'm not going to go, because the tuition at the time, both my parents were actually retired already, so like even if it wasn't an astronomical amount of money, it would have been for them. Like, it would have been a pretty significant effort. And I was grateful enough that I just had a roof over my head and I didn't have to pay for room and board. Eventually I got on a tuition-free slot, okay? This is the first thing that I, quote, manifested. To some extent. You can call it manifestation, but, manifestation at the end of the day is just a fancy word for getting what you want, okay? And it was only the first bump in the road, because the degree in itself was really difficult. It was really difficult, especially because, obviously I had been out of high school for a long time, and it was high-level math, it was high-level physics. There were at least 5-6 subjects per semester. Usually 1 or 2 of them were projects, the other ones were exams. But it was difficult. There was a lot of, physics, a lot of calculus, a lot of mechanics. Then, of course, there was electronics, electronic circuits, high-frequency transmissions, etc., etc. A lot of mathematics, a lot of stuff that I had to learn. And then there was also the programming courses, and a whole bunch of stuff like PCB projects, etc., etc. I went for a degree in electronics and telecommunications because I figured this would be an area where I would have more like options when I graduated, which was good in the long term. During my time in university, there were also some instances of quote manifestation. For instance, in my third year, there was a professor that told us about this study program abroad, and it was a university. I'm not going to say which university. It was a university somewhere close to the sea, the ocean, and I had never in my entire life been to the sea. I have never seen the sea or the ocean my entire life. And just when I heard that he said it's near the sea and it's a gorgeous area, that was like one of the main reasons I wanted to go there. and that was one of the main reasons, number one. But number two, I also thought, wow, this would be a great notch on my resume or my CV, because, you know, if you say that you have an internship in a foreign university, it looks, your CV will stand out for potential employers. So I really, like, as soon as he talked about it, I was like already daydreaming, like, oh my god, I can't, oh wow, I have to apply for this. And then he followed it up with, well, you have to have grades that are over 90%. And I was like, great. At that time, my grades were not that good. Like, on average, it was probably around 70%. I also had not passed all the exams. I think I still had like 2 exams from the previous year that I hadn't passed. So I didn't have all my exams passed, which of course would have detracted from my overall average. And I knew that I didn't stand a chance because there were all these other kids that had much higher grades and that had, like, whatever, they were straight A students. A lot of them were straight A students because they were cheating on every test and every exam, but I will not dwell on that. I was like one of the few kids, I think, in university that didn't cheat at any tests and any exams. And, but whatever, the downside of it was that my grades were not that good. But as soon as this guy, like, talked about this university by the ocean, I just kept daydreaming, like, wow, it would be so amazing if I could go there. Like, the whole time I was just daydreaming about it. And the next, this was around, I think, the beginning of the school year, so this was in around October. The next year, actually no, that year in December, I went to talk to this professor that I knew was dealing with foreign scholarships, like, you know, doing like an exchange program for, you could do an exchange program for like, you know, a few months during the university year, or you could study over the summer, which would be like a summer internship, but you would do some project at the university in question. So I went over to him because 2 of my colleagues had gone to this guy, and they had done internships in this country that I wanted to go because I thought, you know, this is a country that is very technologically advanced, and I thought, you know, an internship here would look really good on my resume. So I went to this guy, I told him, he asked me some questions. Why do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Which countries? Blah, blah, blah. Do you speak what foreign languages? Blah, blah, blah. And he just took my, you know, he said, okay, noted, I'm going to see what I can find for you, and I'm going to keep you up to date. And this was around December. And then until March, I heard nothing from him. I sent him an email somewhere around March the next year, and I said, hello, like, do you know, I spoke to you last year. Is there any program that you could tell me about of maybe studying abroad or doing a summer internship for a foreign university? And he was like, well, actually, I don't have any of, actually, it's interesting that you just sent me this email. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to get back to you because something came up, but it's not what you asked me for. It's something else, but I'll get back to you when I have more details. And I was like, okay. And then he sent me an email and he said, you know, meet me at university, blah, blah, blah. I go there, I meet him, and he said, you know, unfortunately, I cannot get you an internship at this country that you talked about, but Instead, I have this last minute offer of 2 slots for students to go to this university by the ocean. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. It was the same university that the other professor had mentioned at the beginning of the previous year. And you know, I had no idea that he could get me to this university by the ocean. And I was like, wow. Like, and I was like, the only problem was that I didn't speak the foreign language. And he said, it's fine if you go to the university with English because the professors speak English. But the problem will be, you know, if you're staying there at the dorms, it would be good if you can learn a little bit of the language, you know, because maybe people won't speak the language, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, whatever. I was totally excited. I was like, that's it. I am going to the university by the ocean. And I told no one about it. And this is another thing that I'm going to point out towards the end of the video about manifesting and not telling anyone about your plans. So I told no one about it except I think about a month after, when it was already sure that I was gonna go. He applied, you know, he did all the paperwork and whatever. He asked if I knew of any other students that might be interested, and I spoke to this other girl from the university that I kind of got along with. And I had hoped initially that she would come along, and she bailed out at the last minute. And with this internship, there was a lot of obstacles as well. Like, initially, they said that I would be getting a scholarship money before leaving, and then when I went to talk to the international department of the university, they said, actually, we cannot guarantee that you're going to get this money before you leave. And to me, that was a huge bummer, because once again, I didn't come from a lot of money. My parents were retired. I couldn't just pull a couple of €1,000 out of my behind. And I was really counting on that money, but I had a benefactor, a member of my family, who at the last moment said, I'm gonna send you some money because, you know, for this opportunity, whatever. And so it was very last minute, and I ended up going alone. Just to reiterate, up until that point, I had never even traveled within the country by myself. I left to a place where I didn't speak the language, and it was about 2,000 kilometers away from home, where I didn't have any family, I didn't have any friends, I didn't know anyone, except the person of contact at the university that was supposed to meet me there at the train station. Once I switched, you know, to one plane and a train and a couple of shuttles, I would eventually meet this person. But it was a huge shift in my existence, the fact that I traveled to this place by myself. Okay, so that was a huge manifestation thing in terms of the manifesting thing. Another thing that I should have mentioned before this was that my mother was eventually cured from cancer. I don't remember exactly how long it took until we finally got the totally clear signal, but she went through chemo, I think 6 to 9 months. I think 6 months maybe. She went through the whole stuff of losing her hair. I had to help her shave her head. It was really emotionally draining. It was stressful, but the whole time I just, again, refused to believe that anything bad was going to happen to her. Now, I know that this is like not going to work for everyone. Like, a lot of people are going to say, well, I don't know, I lost relatives to cancer and I prayed and, you know, they still got sick. And I'm like, I understand. I think a lot of this has to do with, to some extent, maybe karma. Maybe. I mean, I have other reasons to believe this, you know, whatever. I'm not going to get into it because already this story is dragging on. Yeah, my mother was eventually cleared. I mean, I did continue to do the prayers and the stuff every day, even though, again, I wasn't telling anyone that, hey, I'm praying for my mother. I was not raised to be super religious. My family is not super religious. I'm actually the most kind of like spiritually inclined person in my immediate family. I didn't tell anyone, you know, about that. I didn't even talk about the fact that my mother was sick. I didn't talk about it with my employers. I finally mentioned to when I quit my job from the supermarket, because I had to quit my job when I started the university full time. I tried to keep the job part time, but I realized that I would not be able to do that because it was too tiring, and it was not worth it because the money was crap. And and when I quit my job, I finally told my employer that, my mother's sick, and she was like, "Why didn't you tell us? Like, what I should have told you? Like, it's my personal business." And I didn't tell anyone. Again, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to talk about it, because if you talk about it, again, this is something from The Secret as well. Like, you keep talking about the negative stuff in your life is just going to accentuate them, And I really didn't want to think. I didn't want to focus on the disease. I wanted to focus on she's going to get well, and that's it. And, and eventually she did. She has been now clear for, I don't know, over 10 years, I think. And yeah, no, not 10 years yet. I think it's just under 10 years, I think. Yeah. And anyway, she is doing well, and she keeps getting, regular tests, like I think every year. But yeah, I don't know if I would put this under the category of manifestation, but kind of, I would, because, yeah. Okay, this thing was a manifestation. Okay, the internship to the foreign university was another manifestation. About 2 months before the foreign internship, there was this other course that I wanted to go to, and again, it was a course for European students, and it would have been like completely covered except for transportation. So you had room and board for, I think, about 10 days. The entire course was 10 days. It was this multicultural thing for, universities from around Europe. It was an interesting course. So it was like you would actually go and attend some courses, but it was also like social activities afterwards and all this stuff. And it was like one of those things that I really didn't think that I would be selected for, because I was significantly older than most of the other students. I was significantly, like 4 or 5 years, somewhere between 3 and 5 years older than most students that applied for this stuff. And and it was like the only thing you had to do to be selected for this stuff is to write a funny story or something like that. You had to write a funny story in English, and using certain themes or words or whatever. And I applied to 3 of these courses. I didn't get into the first one that I would have wanted. I think the first one was in Greece. The second one was I don't remember. Gosh, I don't even remember. You could apply for 3 courses maximum. And I think the first one I applied was Greece. The second one I think was, Finland. And the third one was in Germany. And I got, and again, for this one, I didn't care in which one of these 3 I would ultimately end up for. Any one of them would have been great. And I really just, again, envisioned myself, like, I can't wait to get the letter that says I have, been selected for this course, and I will be traveling here. And again, I kind of put myself in that space of, like, as if it's already done, like it's already completed and I have already achieved this. And having that feeling of satisfaction of, I have achieved this, like that, I have achieved this through my own efforts, and I have tried hard and I have gotten my results. And guess what? I remember that there was like a period of about 1 month when they could answer you whether you got into one of the courses or not. And I didn't get my answer until towards the end of the period. And actually, after I got on the course, I finally went to Germany. And after I got on the course, I found out later there, I overheard some conversations that actually there were 2 people like before me that had quit the last moment. So I was second runner up, basically, because they had a limited number of people that could attend, and I was the second runner up and 2 people ahead of me got announced that they couldn't attend at the last minute. So that's how I got in. And it was really cool. And again, it was another thing that I thought would look good on my resume. And it did. And aside from that, there was another project that I got, again with Germany. There was this other project that I got into that, again, this was purely professional this time. And I applied for it with a colleague. And we had to work on this project. And if you managed to complete it successfully, you just had a diploma that said, hey, you participated in this project that is, in between two universities. One of them was in Germany. And we had to go there and present the project. And that was another thing, because the project in itself was pretty daunting, and we had a lot of hurdles along the way. It was one semester that we had to work on it. And we finally managed to, turn it in time, and it was functional, and, we got the diploma. It was good. And a lot of it was, because we were lucky. Like, we were lucky to get the right information and the right help at the right time. Again, I won't get into many details because it's too much to talk about, okay? But these are some things that I can think about in terms of, quote, manifesting, that I have, quote, manifested. And after this, so finally I managed to graduate. I graduated in the year that I was supposed to graduate, but I didn't graduate in the right, like, not in 4 full years. So technically we were supposed to graduate in summer. I graduated in autumn that year, okay? And I did graduate, and just a month before graduation, I finally got my first full-time job as an engineer. And that was, and again, about this job, let me talk about the job first. So I got my first full job as an engineer, and it was not my best choice. And again, it was pretty stressful. I remember in my senior year, I was, applying. I had had a part-time job during my second year of university as assistant manager for an IT company, and I was filling in for this woman who was on maternity leave. And after she came back, she said, I had hoped that I would keep that job for the rest of the university, but after she came back, she said that we only want someone to work in the early hours of the morning, because like she would be filling in from like 2 p.m. onwards. And I said, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. And again, the money would have been crap, but at least it would have been something, because of course, once you get to the point where you make your own money, you don't like the feeling of not having your own money anymore. And I really wanted to keep that part-time job, but unfortunately it wasn't possible. After that, I got an internship at another telecommunications company that I actually ended up working for. But I was, again, this is a totally different story in itself, but I just barely, I basically was not hired for that job because they hired someone else's niece in front of me. That's the short story of it. Because there was this internship where, you had to, if you wanted to apply for a part-time job at the company, you could go through a test and a presentation on everything that you had learned during that internship. And I was the second runner-up. There was a woman in front of me who had like a 90% score, and I had an 80-something% score. And they had 2 openings for that internship, and eventually they hired afterwards I found out that they hired the niece of one of the project coordinators, which really pissed me off. But that's typical nepotism it happens everywhere, I guess, but I think in these parts of the world, it's just like, they don't even try to hide it. Like, oh, I'm sorry, we need to hire someone else's niece, so you're not going to get the job, even though you did clearly much better at the internship than this other person, but whatever. And I was really bummed about that. I was very, very bummed about it, because I really wanted that job. It would have been like in telecommunications, exactly what I wanted to kind of focus on. And after that, so this was like, after that, actually, this was like, I think before the summer internship, in the foreign university. But after that, I kind of struggled again to try to find a job. Like, I was applying to a lot of things. I think I went to, like, I don't know, somewhere between 10, 15 interviews, I think, over the course of, like, not a long time, something like a year and a half, or something like that. And I remember, actually, when I went to some interviews, they actually asked me, how come you did a second college degree? As if it was a bad thing. Like, you know, like, as if to say that, oh, like, what, you couldn't get a job the first time, so now you tried a different university or something like that. And I remember I was so pissed, and I was like, one of them, actually, I'm not afraid to say this, was an asshole at Continental Automotive. So yes, I said the A word. And after that, I actually had this I still have a very low opinion of Continental Automotive. I don't know how it is in other countries, but I don't like it. I've also heard a lot of stories of nepotism and whatnot, and whatever. And finally, after applying to a lot of jobs, I finally got my first full-time job, and it was not my first choice. The salary was not great, but this job turned out to be a great strike of luck, because, before I go on with the story, can I just say another story of manifestation? So for the entire, like, previous, I think, 4 years that I was in university, I was discussing, you know, my parents, my mother especially, was telling me that, you know, maybe we're going to be able to give you this apartment, like, because we're going to move to the country home. And, but then she started having health problems. So I was kind of set on the idea that I would be alone in the apartment, and she would give me full reign to, you know, renovate it and decorate it the way that I wanted to, because I really wanted to live alone in my own place. But after she got sick and a bunch of other financial things, I'm not going to get into details, she finally said, actually, unfortunately, we cannot give you this apartment anymore, which, again, pissed me off. Because I was fantasizing about living in that apartment by myself. And, but, you know, I understood it at the end of the day that it wasn't, you know, it was not possible anymore, partly also because of her health problems. And she had to be in the city. She couldn't just live in some remote area in a village, and whatever. So I started, but I kept fantasizing, you know. I was like, okay, fine, I'm not going to have my own apartment, but as soon as I get a full-time job, I'm going to be able to, you know, rent out a place and maybe do some decorations the way that I like them. And the whole time, I remember I had this IKEA catalog from, I think it was around, I'm not going to say the year, it doesn't really matter. It was about, let me think, about 6 years ago. 6 or 7 years. It was a catalog of IKEA from around 6 or 7 years ago, from a family member that had gone to an IKEA store. There is no IKEA store in my city, and this person brought the catalog, and I kept ruffling through the papers, like, for about 4 years, and fantasizing about how I would decorate my apartment. And this is another thing, like, that I realized after, was basically applying The Secret, because I would, you know, this idea of attracting what you want, because I would literally, like, I would take that catalog everywhere. I think I still have that catalog somewhere. It's like, it was all, like, it's all damaged and the papers are all ripped and stuff. I would put little markers with all the different furnitures that I, you know, was considering maybe buying at some point, and different decorations, because the catalog wasn't just, you know, furniture. It was also, like, a lot of decorations and different settings and all this stuff. And I kept visualizing what it would be like to decorate my own apartment. So guess what? I get my job. Fast forward to, you know, some years later, I think. No, actually about 2 years after I got that catalog, I think. About 2 or 3 years, I got my first job full-time as an engineer. And, or with 1 or 2, somewhere between 1 and 3 years. I can't really calculate right now. And I got my first job as an engineer, and guess what? At first, I was kind of bummed. It was kind of chaotic. I was not thrilled. because it was like, at first they told us at first they told me and a bunch of other 2-3 guys that were hired around the same time, they said you're going to be on this project, and then they changed their mind and they said actually you're going to be on another project. And we kept switching courses. Like, they kept making us go through courses on their internal platform, like, oh, study for this, but actually no, study for that, etc., etc. And I was starting to get impatient and kind of like, okay, what did I get myself into? Like, this job is kind of, these people don't seem very organized. And ding ding ding, about a month and a half into the job, the manager, our new manager, was introduced to us by someone in the company, and he said, oh, hi, you have been selected to be part of this new project that the company is going to take over, and you're going to be going abroad. And I was like, at first, cool. Like, I just thought, okay, free trips on company money. Like, that was my first line of thinking. I hadn't heard that initially, but I heard later that it was a tradition, quote unquote, for the company to actually pay you more when you went on delegations abroad. And ding ding ding, the plot thickens. Okay, to make a very long story short, I was actually working through a subcontracting firm, as a lot of large corporations use subcontractors. And on this new project, there were 3 categories. There were the people who are direct employees to the company, and then there were 2 other categories, groups of people that were working through subcontractors. And subcontractor A, let's say, and the people who were directly employed were told that they were going to get this delegation bonus, which was a huge deal. It was like something like 4 times the normal salary. And because it was something like, it was calculated based on the average national wage of the country of delegation or something like that, whatever. And we, the subcontractors B, were told that we were not going to get that bonus. So to make a long story short, a lot of us, we got together, we hustled, we negotiated, we cursed out our managers, we threatened, we got union involved and stuff. And eventually, after we got back from delegation, I was, throughout this time, like, honestly, just kind of Pollyanna about the whole thing. I was like, yay, I'm going on, delegation. Like, I was just psyched about going on delegation. I was not even thinking about the money. I mean, I thought I could make it work. I'm pretty frugal if I have to be, I mean, we would still be getting, the basic, there's this, like, a basic, legal fee that you get when you are on delegation in a country. So we would still be getting that, but we were told that we would not get the bonus. So finally, like, I think after we got back from the first delegation, we finally got that money, the bonus, because through a lot of negotiations, through a lot of hustling, us getting together, blah, 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 Go Planet, that kind of thing, we finally managed to get the bonus. And we went on delegation in total 3 times, and we made a lot of money. I mean, comparatively to what the salary was. And this is, again, to be fair, this was a strike of luck. I mean, it was absolutely, and actually there were a lot of people who hated us in the company, because there were people who were working for the company for 5 or 6 years, and they had never been sent on a delegation like this where they got a huge bonus of money. And a bunch of us, we were just kids who, had barely graduated university. One of them I think was still a student, and we went, and got a bunch of money. And the following year, a lot of people, I had not even considered at this point, actually buying my own place. So I was fantasizing about renting out a place. But then someone in the family who had bought her own place advised me that, actually you might want to consider getting your own place on mortgage. Because, it's a good investment in the long term. And think about it this way: if you rent out an apartment, you are spending a lot of money every month, but you will not get to call that place your own. You cannot decorate it the way you want to. You will still have to answer to, to the owner, and at the end of the day they can kick you out if they want to, etc. And you might want to consider blah 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 getting a mortgage. I was not thrilled by the idea of a mortgage, as I think a lot of people are not thrilled. I mean, 25 to 30 years of paying sounds daunting for everyone, and this was, mind you, this was like my first job that actually paid enough for me to support myself, and I was just psyched that I made enough money to support myself. I was like, yay, I'm a grown-up now. And now that I think about it, anyway, so again, long story short, eventually there was this program that you could get into that was kind of partially subsidized by the state to encourage people to get their first home or something like that. But it was like a limited thing. You had to apply for it, and the advantage of it was that it was a much lower, you needed a much smaller down payment. So like for a regular mortgage, you needed a minimum of, when I got it, it was 15% of the selling price of the property. So for most people, let's be real, in our generations, I'm an old millennial, and for most people, it's really hard to get your own place, okay? And again, I was lucky not just because I got that money, like the bonus for the delegation, but I was lucky that I was basically living at home, and I was saving almost all my salary every month for almost a year, for like 10 months. So I managed to make enough money for a down payment. And actually, I didn't even have enough because, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I told you this was going to be a really long story. And I applied for that government program, and which, by the way, tedious bureaucracy. You have to go to the bank because you also have to go through a bank, and the bank has to has to do their research into your income, blah blah blah, then whatever equity, blah blah blah. They have to go through all the paperwork, and then they have to send their paperwork to the government's representatives, and the government's representatives have to give their acceptance. And by the time that I made up my mind that, okay, I want to try to actually wait, again, I told you I'm getting ahead of myself. You have to actually first of course, decide upon a property, because you have to send the documents of the property to the bank. The bank sends their evaluator or whatever to, because the bank gives you a loan based on what their evaluation of the property is. So if the seller, let's say, wants to sell an apartment for 70,000 euros, let's say, and the bank only evaluates it to be worth 60,000, they will not give you the loan. So like that, you have to make up for that difference of 70,000 to 60,000 out of your own pocket, basically, if the seller doesn't want to, lower the price. And that's a whole thing. So the whole thing was actually a lot more complicated than I thought, but I kept visualizing how wonderful it would be to have my own place. And like, I literally went like full on secret, I was not even considering the details. I was like, I don't care how this happens, it's gonna happen. And not only did I manage to find a place in my area, which was extremely difficult to do a few years ago, because this area is really coveted. It's an area of high rentability. It's really close to the city center. And it would like a few years ago, it was so rare that any of these decent apartments, like apartments that were not in complete ruin, and would require thousands of euros to renovate. It was very rare for a decent apartment to be up on the market. And I managed to, and again, that I can tell you an entirely different story. About the whole procedure that I went through to finally get the apartment, because there were a lot of obstacles, there was a lot of last minute changes, and eventually I had to go for a full mortgage, whatever, and finally some family pitched in with the last 20% that I needed for all the expenses of getting the property, and I managed to get the property. Okay, long story short. And Okay, so this is like what I can think about so far in terms of manifesting that is pretty major. And this is the part when I'm going to get a little bit theoretical, okay? So first, talking about manifestation, like in my experience, the most important thing is belief. It's belief. Like, you have to believe that you can do it. Number two, and equally important, is to act on it, because, I mean, if you just sit around and wait on, wish on a star, nothing is just going to fall on your lap, okay? And then the third factor, which is the part you're not going to like, the third factor that I would add when it comes to the things you can't control is don't tell people your intentions. And this is not necessarily because, it's not just to take into account the fact that some people are going to wish you badly, or not malicious, they're going to be jealous, it's not just because of that, or like they might cause some physical harm in your path to achieving what you want. But I mean, just by them involving their energies with your desire, it may affect the outcome. And again, you're free to not believe what I tell you, but this is what I've thought. This is what I've realized is true. It's accurate, okay? Because, like, for instance, even in Wicca, they tell you, or they tell you don't talk about your spells. And it's not like I'm a full-blown Wiccan, but I do use spells every now and then. But I don't talk about them. I may say I've done a spell, like, jokingly, and even that's bad enough. Like, normally you shouldn't talk about it. Think about if you and at the end, when it comes to Wicca and stuff, it doesn't really matter what you use. Like, you could use your own religion. Like, for instance, like I mentioned, I pray to a higher power, but I do not follow any religion blindly. And it just gives me a sense of comfort to think that there is a higher power that sees everything, and I think there is. Yes, I do think there is. I have good evidence to support that there is a higher power. However, I don't think that any religion has an 100% accurate picture of what is really happening on a higher plane. But that's a totally different debate I won't get into. But the bottom line is, if you feel comfortable with your religion, then use your religion. Pray to God, like, help me, God, to do this. What is important is the belief. It's like, you have to believe that you can do it. And it's not like I have everything figured out. I'm not some kind of huge manifester, okay? But I do know this much, and I understand, that's what I'm trying to say, because I'm not a large manifester, because we all have subconscious things that are keeping us from achieving what we want. We have, like, certain, hang-ups. We have limiting beliefs, I guess that's what most people will call them. Like, you don't believe that you deserve to get what you want. You don't believe that you can achieve what it is that you want to achieve. And that's the biggest hurdle. Like, with my apartment, for instance, and I still consider this to be the biggest achievement of my existence so far, which, again, to some people sounds that sad. But, considering where I was mentally and emotionally roughly 10 to 15 years ago, I think that I made a lot of progress, okay? Now, not everyone may agree, but this is my experience internally, even though it may not look like this on the surface or according to society's pressures, etc. But with my apartment, not only did I manage to, I didn't achieve exactly what I wanted. I would have wanted a bigger place. We always want a bigger place. But now in retrospect, it's perfect for what I need for myself. Okay, and it's like, I wouldn't trade it for a bigger place. I absolutely love it. I love the location, and the location is the most important thing. I actually would keep looking for apartments in this area. I really wanted an apartment in this area, and I went to several apartments in the area, but they were either too expensive, and the seller was expecting a huge amount of money. The bank wouldn't cover that loan, or they were just shady. They were not high quality. They were usually the kind of apartments that are the first ones to show up on a market, you know, like first floor, last floor, you know, needs renovations of 10,000 euros, which I couldn't have afforded at that time. This place needed minimum touch-ups. Like, I didn't do any massive renovation. It was fully furnished. And the kick of it, which really, the cherry on top of how I knew it was a manifestation, in retrospect, because I didn't think about it at that time when I got it, I was just too excited about having it. I didn't care how it happened. But in retrospect, I was looking at that IKEA catalog at this very specific type of bedroom furniture where the bed is kind of like, it's, how should I put it? It's in the middle of the furniture, you know, so the entire bedroom furniture is like covering a wall, and the bed is kind of like framed by the wardrobe and the shelves, you know, whatever. And I kept looking at that furniture and actually remember telling my mother, like, you know, this furniture would look great in this bedroom back when I was planning on, you know, renovating the place that I had lived in, and she was telling me, nah, I don't like this, like, it looks claustrophobic, blah blah blah. And I was like, what are you talking about? It looks modern, it looks nice. And guess what? Ding ding ding. When I saw this apartment first, it had exactly that furniture that I had seen in the IKEA catalog. I mean, it wasn't exactly, like, it wasn't the same color, but it was the same model of furniture that I kept looking at in the IKEA catalog. And guess what? The irony of it all is that the old furniture actually ended up in my mother's bedroom because she actually liked it at the end. And I didn't, because whatever. This is just like a little more fun extra information, but how, like, that was like really like one of those moments in The Secret where they're talking about, oh my god, I saw exactly the same thing that I kept visualizing in my head over and over and over again. Pretty much, okay? Unfortunately, The Secret also works negatively. Like, if you keep thinking about negative things, and that's also something that I've noticed, you keep attracting the same things. However, okay, so this is the part when I'm going to get into karma. Okay, I'm going to get into karma and astrology and how to use it properly. Now, you need to understand, now, starting with the negative manifestations, quote unquote, I don't think it's fair to blame people for negative manifestations. Now, it's easy to say on the surface that, oh, if you keep running into, especially if it's the same kind of negative situation over and over again, it's very easy to say you are, quote, attracting this. Stop thinking about it and it will just disappear. To some extent, this is true. To some extent, it's not true. Because if something keeps repeating in your reality, it's usually because you have unresolved issues with respect to that thing. Like, for instance, if you keep attracting narcissistic partners, right? This is the world, the universe, quote unquote, the universe's way to keep putting you in front of a mirror and showing you the same situation over and over again, and to tell you to fix it. You know, each time is a chance for you to do something different than you did the last time. But if you keep doing the same thing, you will keep running into the same situation over and over and over again. Okay? To a large extent. That's pretty much what, you know, what I think about this, quote, negative manifestation, negative manifestation, basically. So it's not, I don't think it's like, but of course, on the other hand, it also doesn't help you to keep focusing on negative stuff. Like I mentioned with my mother's illness, for instance, this is an example of, you know, I think a situation that I couldn't have said that the universe was putting it in front of me or something. I don't think it was a situation of a learning experience for me in particular. So this is a situation where you don't want to focus on overly negative consequences, you know, on negative courses of action, because it could bring more negativity in the long run. Okay, so it does help. This is something that I wanted to say about negative manifestation. Another thing about astrology in general, people fall into the trap of fatalism. Okay, when I had a low self-esteem, when I had the worst of my worst depressive phases, I sometimes, even though I didn't realize it at the time, was using astrology as a crutch. I was using it as, basically like, oh, this is why, I didn't get the job, for instance. This is why I don't feel like studying, because, I don't know, Saturn is retrograde and conjunct my moon. To be fair, in retrospect, throughout the worst phases of my depression, I actually had really rough Saturn transits and another things that I'm not going to... Also with respect to numerology, because I also look at that stuff. But something that I wanted to say about this, okay, falling into the trap of fatalism, you need to understand that there is no such thing as I am powerless to my circumstances. There is always something you can do, okay? And... like, whatever it is that you can do, focus on what you can do to better your circumstances. Okay? Don't just think of it in terms of like, oh, I'm going through a bad transit, I have to wait for it to go away. Because guess what? This one's going to go away, then another bad transit is going to start. And especially, I also dabble in Chinese astrology, I also dabble in numerology. For instance, when I was going through that recovery phase from depression in my early 20s, I was going through 3 consecutive, I think they're called annual number ones. And they're the special, like, if you search about numerology, there's a way to calculate them based on your name. So it's not the normal year number, which is calculated based on, I think, your day of birth, your month of birth, and the current year. They are calculated based on your name and the number correspondences for each letter. And these are, they will vary throughout your life, and they vary based on each person's name. And I went through a phase, like, when I was going through the worst of my depression. Again, I don't want to turn this into a numerology discussion. If you're interested, I can talk about numerology. Please comment in the comment section. But when I was going through the worst of my depression, I was going through a lot of 9s. And 9s are years of tumultuous emotions and blah, blah, blah. And I was also going through Saturn transits, really rough ones. Saturn was hitting my Venus, and then it was hitting my moon and whatever. So there was a lot of heavy emotional transits. Also Pluto involved at the same time. And when I started to lift out of the years that were the most instrumental to me getting out of depression, taking control of my life, they were number 1s. 3 consecutive years of number 1s. And this is important because the number 1 is about independence. It's about taking control of your life. It's about being assertive. And without even realizing it's like, it's something that's going to happen inside you anyway. Okay, so these things are going to influence you. But in retrospect, it helps to see the patterns of how you got from A to B, But what I wanted to say is, you can't just wait for the right circumstances, because, like in my story, and this is the reason why I told you the full story, if you had the patience to listen to it. In my story here, like, for instance, if I hadn't gone for a second college degree, if I hadn't applied to this job, I wouldn't have gotten the success that I had. And that's another thing. I wouldn't have gotten that windfall of getting, a lot more money and having enough for a down payment. I wouldn't have gotten to that point if I hadn't taken action. And the reason I say this is, according to Chinese astrology, and I checked this in retrospect, the year when I bought my property was actually the year when I had the highest real estate luck in over 12 years. And the reason I want to point this out, just number 1, not just because it explained why I managed to buy my property, but to illustrate the fact that I had the same level of luck 12 years prior. But 12 years prior, I was in high school and I didn't have any money. I had never had a job. I had no savings, no nothing. I don't know, maybe if I had known about it back then, I would have played the lottery. Maybe I would have won something. But I don't think so, and the reason I say this is because you need to work for it. You can't just wait for the luck cycle to just appear, and you're going to sit there for 10 years with your hands in your pockets and wait for, something to fall on your lap. You have to do everything in your power to better your circumstances. And again, when I applied for can I just say another thing is that when I applied for a second college degree, being in my early 20s, I had I had no support. I had almost no support. Actually, I had almost no support emotionally for most of my life, but that's a totally different story. But I had no support. I had a lot of people who told me, you're wasting your time. Why are you starting a second college degree? Oh, you're such a loser. You couldn't get a job, and now you're going for a second college degree. What if this doesn't work out? And I was like, what if it doesn't work out? I will never know unless I try. And my line of thinking was, even if I don't end up working in engineering for the rest of my life, I will always have that feeling of satisfaction of taking on something that I found was monumentally challenging and managing to complete it. And by the way, just to throw another little cherry on top, the exam that we had in university that was universally considered the most complicated, the most difficult exam that we had, it was high-level physics, and it required high-level mathematics to solve. I had the highest score in over 200 people that were in university at that time taking the course, because everyone had to take the course in that year. And the professor we had, actually, I think he had taught for either UCLA or MIT, I'm not sure. Anyway, and he was, that was a hardcore exam. There was no chance of cheating, and I had the highest effing score. The people who would normally cheat on every test and they had, A's on a regular basis, those people failed the exam. And for me, it was little things like that, even though overall my grades were not great. My overall average, I think, was 7.5 to 8 by the end of university, on a scale from 1 to 10. 6 actually was the minimum passing grade, I think. 5 or 6. I think you had to have 6 at your final thesis, whatever. And I didn't have the best grades, okay? I didn't make, I didn't get any ribbons, I didn't get, extra scholarship money. But at the exam that was the hardest, I had the highest effing grade. And there were also other instances during university where I had really high grades at some of the most complicated exams, okay? And this was coming from a person that, years prior had no confidence, no self-esteem. I didn't think that I could take on any real challenges. I was super insecure. And I was like, ding, 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 after I graduated. Not only, the university turned out to be a great thing. One of the best things that I've managed to do. Also because it gave me that opportunity to travel abroad, where I had other challenges and I had to travel by myself in a foreign land. And I traveled a lot by myself in a foreign land, and I saw a bunch of really great places, and it actually opened up my appetite for traveling a lot. So I have won a lot of experiences in retrospect. But the bottom line is about luck cycles, okay? In Chinese astrology, that's another thing that I wanted to say, and I'm going to close it up because it's going to be a really long video. In Chinese astrology, everyone has at least generally, most people that I've seen have at least 2 decades that are considered lucky in their lives, okay? And you can also, of course, there are also ways that you can assess which decades are going to be lucky based on Vedic astrology. But in Chinese, it's actually in some ways easier, okay? But the reason I say this, let's say that I believe in Chinese astrology and I check my horoscope and I see that my luck cycles are going to start at the age of 50. And I say to myself, well, if my luck cycles, and let's say that I see the 2 decades before that are unlucky, really low luck. And I say to myself, clearly there's no point in me trying hard to do anything because, I'm going through a bad luck cycle. Guess what? What's going to happen is that, the luck cycle doesn't mean that something's gonna fall on your lap. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say, is you still have to work hard. You still have to have something to show for when you reach those luck cycles. Because like I mentioned again in my example, like, if I hadn't gone to university, if I hadn't taken on the challenge, if I hadn't hustled and hustled and hustled, I wouldn't have been at the right place at the right time to have that job that offered me a great bonus for traveling, and that allowed me to get the down payment for an apartment. Okay, and throughout the years when I was struggling, I had no way of seeing that it would lead to something good. I was doing it because, like, I had nothing better to do, basically. It was like, either I'm going to take on challenges or I'm going to wait to die. Pretty much that was the line of thinking. So that's what I'm trying to say. I've seen so many people even people that I've had come over for consultation, sometimes sound fatalistic. Like, oh, I have this configuration. Like, does it mean that I'm never going to get married? And, like, look, if you want to get married, then work towards getting married. Like, and like, I don't believe in giving up in general. Like, really, I don't. I absolutely believe in where there's a will, there is a way. And, like, if you really want to achieve something, of course, like I mentioned, people have blockages. Okay, so sometimes you think you want something, but on some subconscious level, there's something blocking you, there's something holding you back, and you don't even realize what that is, which is why it is useful, among other things, to see a therapist, which I know is not always affordable, or get astrological consultations, which again is not always affordable. I have gotten astrological consultations myself a lot of the time. So actually I'm going to say this, I had one consultation with regards to my career while I was in this university, and I was really having a really hard time, and I got a consultation from KRS. You probably know him if you come from a Vedic astrology perspective, and I actually asked him, do you think I should continue with electronics, or do you think that I should go for something like, do you think I should have gone for something like biology or like medicine, because I had considered going for these things, but again, I chose electronics because I thought it was the shorter study program, and it was also going to guarantee me, more likely to guarantee me a job. And he said, actually, looked at my chart, and he said, actually, you have the chart of an astrologer, so maybe you should look into this and, learn it more in depth. And I was like, like, first of all, I was surprised. I mean, I wasn't entirely surprised that he said that. I was curious as to what he saw in my chart that made him say that. Yeah, and he actually recommended that. I mean, he also said that I can make money through electronics, which, in retrospect, actually, since I got that reading, I have learned a lot more about Vedic astrology, and I know exactly what placements he said that I have that make me good at astrology, quote unquote. And I wasn't entirely surprised, because I've been obsessed with astrology from the age of 10. Different systems, numerology, you name it. Also, he mentioned tarot, which I've also dabbled in over the years. And but aside from that, he also mentioned, and also since the years since I got in that reading, I also realized that in my horoscope, it's actually written that I am meant to some extent learn to work in telecommunications, not just IT, but telecommunications and specifically. And that's another thing, because part of it is karma. Okay, and so sometimes you want something and you won't get it because that's karma, okay? But it's everything is ultimately towards your greater good. Like, because if it is karma, then you need to pay off that karma. You need to keep doing the things that you don't want to do, but life keeps throwing in your face to deal with for a reason, right? I mean, in my case, for instance, it's written in my karma that I have to deal with unpleasant superiors at work. And I've seen it in the charts of many people, okay? And in these situations, actually, it's not going to help the problem, I think, to just try to dodge the bullet. And just, it helps to just go through it. Jump into the fire, or you'll never be free. Like that song. So anyway, this has been, again, a very long rant, and there are other things that I wanted to include, but I'm never going to finish. I need to sleep. And I also wanted to get into past life. I also wanted to get into karma and the evidence that I have that make me believe that, karma is very real, and you need to be careful with everything you do and what you don't do in this life. You don't want to acquire more bad karma. And also, I wanted to talk more a little bit about what I think about past life regressions and past life, things, connections to karma, and also maybe a little bit of Chinese astrology. So in any case, if you have managed to listen to this, thank you very much, because you deserve a medal. And if you have managed to, and if you managed to listen to this, and if you would be interested to learn more on Chinese astrology or numerology, please let me know in the comment section. I'm not an expert on these subjects, but I can talk about the things that I have learned and I have used over the years, and hopefully it will help. It will help to a great extent, I think. Okay, so thank you.